All right, let's dive into the 2026 economy. We're looking at this incredible moment where the promise of brand new technology is colliding with the intense pressure of a world that's, well, fracturing. The picture is becoming clearer, and believe me, it points to a massive, seismic shift in how everything works.
You know, it really feels like we're all standing at the edge of a new economic frontier. The old maps, they're pretty much useless here. The forces that are shaping our world today are creating entirely new challenges, but also some brand new opportunities. And this quote from JP Morgan's 2026 Outlook, it just says it all, doesn't it? The economic world that many of us grew up in, the one that was all about cheap money and super easy global trade, that's over. So, the big question is, what comes next?
Well, the answer seems to boil down to three powerful, interconnected forces that are really defining this new era. We're talking about artificial intelligence, global fragmentation, and an inflation that just won't quit. Let's break each one down.
Okay, first up, the AI investment boom. This is the big promise part of our story. We are witnessing a technological transformation that could honestly be as big as the invention of the computer itself. But, and this is a big but, is this a true productivity miracle, or are we just watching another tech bubble inflate?
To really wrap your head around the scale of this, just look at this number. By 2026, the big U.S. tech companies are on track to spend over $500 billion a year just on capital investment. I mean, that's more than the entire GDP of some countries, and it's basically triple what they were spending only a few years back. And hey, if you thought that was a big number, get this. OpenAI by itself is targeting over $1 trillion in spending just for data centers over the next several years. $1 trillion. By any measure, that is a staggering, mind-blowing amount of money being poured into the foundation of AI. So of course, with this much cash flying around, it leads to the question that's on every single investor's mind. Are we just making the same mistakes all over again? Are we just inflating another bubble that's doomed to pop?
Well, what's so fascinating is when you compare it to the last big tech boom. Remember the dot-com bubble? That was all about massive overbuilding. And let's be honest, companies that had zero revenue. Today feels different. Data center vacancy is at a record low. The key components you need are actually scarce. They're not just sitting around in warehouses. And here's the real kicker. AI is already driving real revenue for major companies. This isn't just hype. This is actual business.
But, you know, this promise, it has a really sharp edge. This wave of innovation is bringing massive disruption with it. Some estimates suggest that over 60% of jobs in developed countries are vulnerable to some kind of upheaval because of AI. That means the job you have right now or the career your kids are planning for, it could be completely transformed. We're not just talking about new jobs replacing old ones. This is like a complete reshuffling of the entire deck. Okay, so let's shift gears to our second major force, global fragmentation. That whole era of a single integrated global economy is coming to an end. What's taking its place is a world of competing blocks, contested supply chains, and, frankly, much more fragile alliances.
And the most dramatic example of this? Just look at the decoupling going on between the US and China. Check out this data. Back in 2017, imports from China made up 22% of their total exports to the US. Today, that number has been nearly chopped in half, down to just 12%. This is a massive rerouting of global trade happening in real time. And this chart really shows you how new trading blocks are being built through policy. The effective U.S. tariff rate on Chinese goods has shot up 20%, while the increases for North American partners like Mexico and Canada are way lower. This isn't an accident. This is actively creating a North American trade corridor.
So what's behind all this? It's a fundamental change in priorities. For decades, the name of the game was maximum efficiency, finding the absolute lowest cost no matter where on the planet it was. Today, the goal is resilience and security. It's now more important to have a supply chain you can count on than to have the absolute cheapest one.
And hey, this fragmentation isn't just about trade. Europe is going through its own seismic shift. You know that peace dividend, the economic benefit countries got from lower defense spending after the Cold War? It's officially over. Now the focus is on something called conflict capex, which is just a fancy way of saying spending on defense. And you can see it right in the numbers. Germany's defense spending, for instance, has nearly doubled as a share of its economy, and that new NATO target is pushing it even higher. And all this brings us to the third powerful force, inflation. After years of being a total afterthought, inflation is back. And the really crucial thing to understand here is that this isn't just some temporary blip. We are seeing a structural shift that's making higher prices a stubborn, baked-in feature of this new economy.
Let's just ground this in the data for a second. According to a recent U.S. Treasury report, even after a whole series of rate hikes, core CPI inflation was still running at 3% as of September 2025. Prices are just proving to be really sticky, staying well above that 2% target everyone's aiming for.
So why is inflation being so persistent? Well, it's basically a perfect storm of pressures. We've got major shortages, or capacity gaps, in everything from housing to the power grid. At the exact same time, consumers have way more wealth than they did before the pandemic, and that's fueling demand. And on top of all that, the two big forces we just discussed, building resilient but more expensive supply chains and more government spending, they're both adding fuel to this inflationary fire.
Now, with all this massive government debt out there, policymakers are facing some really tough choices. This leads to a risk of something called financial repression. Okay, think of it like this. If a government owes a ton of money, letting inflation run a little hot makes that debt worth less over time. It's sort of a quiet way to shrink the debt problem without raising taxes. But, and this is key, it's a huge risk for savers and investors whose money is losing value every single day.
So let's pull all these threads together. The 2026 outlook is really defined by this one central idea. The incredible promise of new technology is meeting the intense, real-world pressures of a changing global order.
So, this is the new reality. On one hand, you have the unbelievable promise of AI, this engine for massive investment and productivity. But it isn't happening in a bubble. That promise is colliding head-on with two powerful pressures: a world that's splitting apart into competing teams, which makes everything more complicated, and the constant nagging pressure of inflation that just quietly eats away at our purchasing power.
This is the path forward we all have to figure out how to navigate. It's a journey into that new frontier we saw at the very beginning, and it's one that's filled with both amazing opportunities and totally uncharted risks.
And that really just leaves us with the one central question. The transformative promise of AI is running headlong into the very real pressures of a fractured, more expensive world. So the challenge for all of us is simple, but it's also profound. How are we going to navigate this new economic frontier?